Hello, magic makers, and welcome back to the Metaphysical Apothecary. We are your hosts, Shannon and Megan.
Hi, everyone.
Also known as the Scorpio Sisters, here to explore the mysterious, the magical, and the arcane.
This is part 2 of our first episode, Hexes, Curses, and Dark Magic, oh my, with some never heard bonus material as well. Enjoy!
In the dark is when we feel closest to dark deities as well. I work with Hecate and Lilith. They both dwell in the dark. It's a time for clarity. The darkness is honest. If you feel something in the dark, if you hear something in the dark, you're not going to be fooled by your eyes and the truth about what you're experiencing. So when you work with a goddess like Hecate, for instance, not only is she the goddess of witches, the stability actually needed to stay on that path without getting distracted by things that are to the right or to the left. You have to keep focused on your path because in the dark you could trip, you could fall. You have to keep your eye out for obstacles and be thinking about, how am I going to overcome this obstacle? How am I going to keep moving forward on this path? So that's one of the big things that Hecate has taught me. She is often depicted with a lantern, but at least with my relationship with her, whether or not she allows me to use that depends on the situation. Many people know Lilith as Adam's first wife in Christian and Jewish traditions, left Eden because she didn't like being subjugated. The idea that she was not allowed to be equal to her partner. Lilith, for me, explores many taboos that women embody. We bleed, we're hairy, we get angry. Lilith embraces all of these things and says, this is a part of you. And you can either resist it, pretend it doesn't exist, or you can acknowledge it, embrace it, and choose how you react to it when it comes up for you.
Dark magic and dark deities are also things that have been hidden.
I would say that's absolutely true. Lilith was literally demonized for wanting to be equal to her partner. That's the story of a lot of other dark deities in general. Lucifer was also literally demonized. He was a messenger of Venus, of the morning star, and he was turned into the literal devil incarnate. When you work dark magic, it's also an ideal time for shadow work, for dipping inward, to exploring these things about ourselves that we find taboo, distasteful, that we've rejected. So it's an uncovering of those things that are secret, that are hidden. So when we bring them to the surface, we can reintegrate them back into our consciousness. We're reaching into the dark. Carl Jung had this idea that we create a shadow self where we store all of our skeletons. It's this dark closet. We open that up and examine those. One of the biggest aspects, I would say, of dark magic that a lot of witches do is shadow work and dark magic, especially during this time of year. After Samhain, we turn around and we go, okay, time to go rooting around in the closet. Let's see what we got. And we bring those things out into the light magic, which if dark magic is magic that is done in the dark, light magic is done in the day or in the light on purpose to harness the light energy. I don't do a ton of light magic because the sun and I do not get along.
Unfortunately, the sun likes me a lot more than I like it, so I do work with it.
Right, because you work with Apollo.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the ways that we can do light magic, by harnessing the magical energy of the sun, which represents warmth, growth, internal and external nourishment. Most people, at least, feel comforted in the light, in the sun. You can see what is around you. You're aware of all of those things. The bright, broad daylight, things can't really hide in there.
Since working in the dark is working with honesty, working in the light is working with perception. The energy is more perceptive, up for interpretation, whereas in the dark, there's not a lot of interpretation to be had.
I think that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
The light is a good place to look around and go, this is my perception, this is my intention, this is what I want to do. And just as in white magic, project that back out into the universe. So just as there are deities that we would work with most often in the dark, there are also deities that we would work with most often in the light. A lot of us like to work with fairy energy, and fairies love anything shiny. If you've ever encountered fae energy, if there is something shiny there, they will want it. So some of the ways we can harness light energy are through reflective items such as mirrors, glossy metal, polished crystals. A lot of us love our crystals that reflect light and refract light, especially inside of them. Selenite's great for this. Kyanite, any more high vibration crystal. Tourmalated quartz, where you've got all of those little planes inside that reflect all of the little rainbows. Prisms, anything that can project a beam of light. So if you're working with light magic, surrounding yourself with light, and with the color spectrum, if you can surround yourself with that, it should add strength to your working. When I was doing research for this, I realized that I do not have any light deities on my pantheon. They're all dark deities, or they're tricksters, or they're associated with the moon.
And the moon you associate with dark magic.
I do. And you can see the moon during the day sometimes, but it's as you were talking about with Aphrodite and Venus, I see the moon at night. It's the largest, it's the clearest. She's got her best face on. During the day, she feels kind of like I do early in the morning, where you have your eyes half open and your power's not quite at its peak yet.
Our dark energy and our dark magic is coming from a place where we've put things in the dark because it's safer for those things to exist in the dark, have labeled this as bad, incorrect, abnormal in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly.
And the energies that we're working with, whether they're the dark goddesses that we both tend to work with, the dark god energies that I do work with as well, they're there to try to pull that up out of the darkness of ourselves, of our shadows, in order for us to become whole and complete.
Yes, definitely. When we talk about dark magic and black magic, two of the subjects that people picture are death magic and blood magic.
And they don't picture it in a light and fluffy type of way either. This is not a welcoming picture that tends to pop into people's minds.
Right, exactly. Death magic, people often picture reanimating the dead or some other very gruesome image. That's not universal, especially among practicing witches, but when you say death magic, that's usually what people picture: mummies walking around or zombies and things like that.
More likely zombies than mummies, because if you think of a mummy walking around, you might have an image of Brendan Fraser coming to the rescue.
I would mostly be okay with that.
I don't know. Sometimes I feel bad for the mummy, so I'm kind of like, depends on the mummy.
It really does. It depends on why they've been reanimated and whether they're the victim or the villain.
Exactly.
So rather than the stereotype, death magic, for many of us who walk the darker paths of magic, involves communing with the dead rather than reanimating them or working with body parts or any of those gory details. Although bones can be a very powerful magical tool. I personally don't work with bones, but I know that you do.
I work with bones if I happen to have bones, but I don't keep them on hand. Right. And it's a tradition in my family, and you might actually have an unknown tradition in your family that's similar. We'll work with bone magic in wishing bones.
Okay.
So if we roast a turkey, a chicken, or any type of poultry, we all save the wishbone. We dry it out so that way we can break it to see whose wish is going to come true, whose intention is going to come to fruition.
And that's a very common tradition in many families.
Mm-hmm.
I have to rescind the idea that I don't use bone magic because I actually have several chicken wishbones drying out in my kitchen right now.
Another one that I don't personally work with, but I do know people who do, is chicken feet.
Yeah, that's very common, especially among those who work with Baba Yaga.
Mm-hmm. They are a form of death magic.
Mm-hmm.
So I do work with bones. If there's nice looking bones, I might keep a few to throw, but eventually I do feel there's a need to bury them and allow them to pass, to decompress.
Put that energy back into the earth.
Yes.
And you mentioned the long tradition of throwing bones, which has many different meanings, but the original was the literal throwing of bones to perform augury.
Yeah, divination. Yeah, I mean, even necromancy of itself, it's a word that people shudder at because either you think either fiction or you're associating with villainry.
Right.
Whereas necromancy is literally necro, meaning death, and the dead, and mancy, meaning divination.
So it's death divination.
Yes.
So you could be summoning a spirit. You could be communing with the dead as part of a ritual done in a cemetery or in a mausoleum.
Mm-hmm.
You could be using bones to divine the future.
Yeah, you can be tapping into your ancestry in some way, shape, or form. There's a lot to work with.
Right? Communicating with the dead, communing with the dead is in its essence what death magic is at its core.
Mm-hmm.
We're using that energy. We're communing with spirits. We're going into cemeteries. We're going into mausoleums that are open to the public. We're not advocating breaking into mausoleums.
Please don't do that.
Yes, please don't. We're talking about working with an ancestor altar or petitioning deceased loved ones for help or protection. There's also petitioning or calling on the energy of deceased celebrities or people that we admire, like Marilyn Monroe, or there are literally hundreds of others to choose from.
Well, I think there's a lot more than hundreds, but yeah. It can also be you tapping into your Akashic records, tapping into your own past lives where you've already passed and you've died.
So just for the sake of a definition, the Akashic records are the records of our past lives.
Yes, and our future lives, technically.
Right, because time is a construct. So that would definitely be a part of death magic as well, where you're literally asking yourself to reference pop culture. Avatar: The Last Airbender, where Avatar asks his past lives for advice when he is making difficult decisions.
And that's a really good example of how you can use death magic without even tapping into anyone else's death.
Right, you just tap into your own. There's also forms of death magic that are very healing and soothing to the spirit. Chris Ashburn is a death doula. She's got a fabulous YouTube channel. She's so down to earth and she's very informative and open. And she talks about being a death doula in terms of easing someone's passing from this plane of existence into the next one, much like a birth doula or a midwife would ease an infant into the open, wider world. Talks about it in terms of transitioning into another plane of existence rather than something ending.
Another way that people do use death magic is through gathering of materials from the places where people are buried, the graveyards and cemeteries.
Right, graveyard dirt, coffin nails, these are things that we see used in spells very often. When I first heard about coffin nails being used, it was in a very negative way. One of my coworkers, her husband, had been writing out a curse to place on someone, and he said, all I need is coffin nails and I can get this done. He was trying to decide whether or not to do it.
The first time I heard about coffin nails, it was literally protection magic.
Right.
I work a lot of protection magic.
Exactly. Protection magic and death magic, blood magic definitely plays a part in that as well, because we're working with graveyard dirt, we're sometimes working with bones, we're working with coffin nails, and sometimes blood magic adds potency. People often associate blood magic with more malevolent magic like curses, and it can be used for that. But in both of our experiences, blood magic is used far more often for a myriad of other things.
Yeah, in fact, blood magic is often used to protect. Some of the oldest spells for blood magic is including blood in a protection jar, where you're putting rusty nails into a jar, you pee in it, and you bleed a little bit into it, and you bury it, and then nothing malicious can get past those things.
Exactly. Who wants to bother with rusty nails and human waste? Plus the blood gives it some potency, some oomph, because blood is full of life force, full of our genetic code.
Please make sure you go and take proper safety procedures if you're ever going to use blood in a spell or in a working.
Yes, please avoid exchanging blood with anybody else, because that can be a recipe for disaster in terms of spreading disease. And also, in media, they do this really terrible thing where they portray people using blood in magic and for ritual, where they slice open their palm. Do not do that. You run the risk of slicing open one of the tendons in your hand and causing yourself really serious injury. The safest way to get blood from yourself, if you're going to use it, is to use sterile implements and prick the side of your finger like they would before you're giving blood.
Mm-hmm.
So really it can be added to any kind of a spell: healing, protection, curses and banishings, hexes, divination. Blood can also be very effective in various forms of death magic if you are attempting to contact your ancestors, especially your ancient ancestors. Blood can really bring forward those ancestors if you're trying to communicate with them for some reason.
Yeah, I do want to make sure we allow for people who have been adopted. That doesn't mean that you can't use blood magic. If you can do a bit of research to find your blood genetic line if you choose to. If you decide that you want to know not the individuals, but maybe the culture in which you came from, and you did DNA sample, that would actually also allow you to tap into like, oh, my many great times grandmother actually comes from Persia. So I'm going to use Persian blood lineage and tap into into that.
Exactly. Plus, if you want to use ancestor magic, but have been adopted and are not interested in your family of origin or your biological family, allow for the people in your adopted family to be your ancestors. That's where you belong in spirit. That's where you belong energetically. And so those people energetically are now your ancestors, as far as I am concerned.
Again, it's all up to the practitioner how comfortable you are with it. But I would actually say the same thing. I have several members of my family who have been adopted, and they are hesitant to use ancestor magic because they don't know who their ancestors are. And whenever they bring it up to me, I gently remind them if they should choose to, they can still use the ancestors that they were raised with stories from.
Right.
So that's all we have on our topic for today, my dears. Thank you so much for listening in, and we hope you'll join us again soon. In the meantime, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest for more witchy wisdom, both here and on our blog. And you can also check out our original art on Society 6 for sacred decor and more. Thanks again for joining us. Go make some magic and live your best life.
Bye!